Hello and welcome to a presentation on vaccination status discrimination by the Montana Human Rights Bureau. The Montana Human Rights Bureau is the state agency tasked with enforcing the Montana Human Rights Act, or MHRA, and the Governmental Code of Fair Practices, or GCFP, which both prohibit discrimination. Discrimination is an adverse action taken against someone in a protected area because of their protected class. You must know what protected areas and protected classes are to understand the definition of unlawful discrimination. The protected areas under Montana law are employment, public accommodations, governmental services, housing, education, insurance, and financial transactions. The protected classes in Montana are any age, sex, race, color, religion, creed, disability, national origin, marital status, political belief in the areas of governmental service and government employment, familial status in the area of housing, and vaccination and immunity passport status. Vaccination and immunity passport status is a unique protected class recognized under Montana law. It began as House Bill 702 and was enacted by the state's 67th legislature. The three-page bill prohibits discrimination based on vaccination and immunity passport status and provides exceptions and exemptions. The preamble of the bill cites the Constitution, statute, and a Montana Supreme Court case regarding Montana's established law pertaining to the sensitivity of healthcare information and privacy interests of such information as a basis for creating vaccination and immunity passport status as a protected class in Montana. The bill was signed by Governor Greg Gianforte, and vaccination and immunity passport status became a protected class under Montana law on May 7, 2021. The bill was then codified as sections 49-312 and 313 in Montana Code Annotated. Although the law came about at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, it must be noted that this protected class covers any vaccine or disease immunity, not just COVID-19. In addition to the general non-discrimination provision provided by the statute that will be discussed shortly, the statute also specifically states that individuals cannot be required to receive vaccines that are under an emergency use authorization, or EUA, or that are undergoing safety trials. So what is vaccination status? The statute defines it as an indication of whether a person has received one or more doses of a vaccine. Again, remember that this definition is broad and not limited to just COVID-19 vaccines. The Bureau has already received cases asserting discrimination based on a requirement to receive a flu shot. Although we often refer to this protected class as just vaccination status, the statute also includes immunity passports. An immunity passport is a document, digital record, or software application indicating that a person is immune to a disease, either through vaccination or infection and recovery. So now that we've defined the protected class, let's review some of the statutory language prohibiting discrimination based on vaccination or immunity passport status. After this review, we'll break it down a bit for a clearer understanding. But first, let's consider Section 49-312, subsection 1A of Montana Code Annotated. It is an unlawful discriminatory practice for a person or governmental entity to refuse, withhold from, or deny to a person any local or state services, goods, facilities, advantages, privileges, licensing, educational opportunities, healthcare access, or employment opportunities based on the person's vaccination status or whether the person has an immunity passport. Section 49-312, subsection 1B of Montana Code Annotated states, It is an unlawful discriminatory practice for an employer to refuse employment to a person, to bar a person from employment, or to discriminate against a person in compensation or in a term, condition, or privilege of employment based on the person's vaccination status or whether the person has an immunity passport. And then Section 49.2.312, subsection 1C of Montana Code Annotated provides, it is an unlawful discriminatory practice for a public accommodation to exclude, limit, segregate, refuse to serve, or otherwise discriminate against a person based on the person's vaccination status or whether the person has an immunity passport. So now let's look at these statutes a little closer. First, who's prohibited from discriminating based on vaccination status or immunity passport status? The first answer is that employers are prohibited from discriminating against an employee because of their vaccination status. An employer is defined by the MHRA as an employer of one or more persons or an agent of the employer. Second, the statute states that a person is prohibited from discriminating based on the vaccination status of another. Person is very broadly defined under the statute as one or more individuals, labor unions, partnerships, associations, corporations, legal representatives, mutual companies, joint stock companies, trusts, unincorporated employees associations, employers, employment agencies, organizations, or labor organizations. Third, governmental entities are also prohibited from discriminating based on vaccination or immunity passport status. A governmental entity can fall under one of two categories. The first category is any branch, department, office, board, bureau, commission, agency, university unit, college, or other instrumentality of state government. The second category is a county, city, town, school district, or other unit of local government and any instrumentality of local government. Fourth, and finally, public accommodations cannot discriminate against someone based on their vaccination or immunity passport status. A public accommodation is a place that caters or offers its services, goods, or facilities to the general public. As seen here, examples of public accommodations include restaurants, hotels, trailer parks, salons, theaters, hospitals, and other business establishments, including nonprofits. There are many different ways that someone can unlawfully discriminate against another person. Unlawful harassment and retaliation are common discrimination complaints seen at the Bureau. Both of these types of discrimination are also prohibited based on the protected class of vaccination or immunity passport status. However, the most common case pertaining to this protected class is disparate treatment. Disparate treatment is a legal term, but a synonym for disparate is different. So it makes sense that at its core, a disparate treatment case in this context basically means someone is being treated differently than others because of their vaccination status. We will now go over the different types of vaccination status cases the Bureau has investigated to date that have resulted in a cause finding after an investigation. These administrative decisions are based on the language of the statute, covering a new area of the law, and have been made without the benefit of judicial guidance. One type of disparate treatment case is requiring vaccination. For example, a railroad was found to have unlawfully discriminated when it sent out notices to employees of a requirement to receive the COVID-19 vaccine or face re-education and possible termination. Although the policy requiring proof of vaccination was only in place for a few days, based on the statutory language that an employer cannot refuse employment based on vaccination status, this employer was found to have violated the Montana Human Rights Act. Similarly, the Bureau found another employer violated the law by threatening an employee with termination for failure to get a required influenza vaccine. In the same vein, a governmental entity discriminated by requiring a vaccine to attend a public meeting, and a nonprofit discriminated when it denied in-person participation in its event based on vaccination status. Another type of common case related to vaccination status is imposing some type of policy on or requiring certain actions from those who are either unvaccinated or refuse to disclose whether they are vaccinated. Several cases have revolved around respondents requiring those who are either unvaccinated or fail to provide proof of vaccination to wear a mask. Subjecting someone to different treatment in this manner is discrimination and resulted in cause findings by the Bureau. A large bank was also found to have unlawfully discriminated when it required an unvaccinated employee to regularly submit to COVID-19 testing and prohibited the employee from business travel. Some respondents have seen discrimination complaints filed against them for offering an incentive to individuals who received a vaccine and show proof. Incentives that are minor enough that they would not coerce someone into receiving a vaccine have been found non-discriminatory. As an example, in one case the Bureau investigated, a grocery store implemented a policy where vaccinated employees would receive a $1 hourly raise for a period of time and get 4 hours of paid leave upon showing proof of vaccination. This type of incentive was deemed substantial enough to be coercive and therefore was discriminatory based on vaccination status. Now that you know what the law says, who it applies to, and are aware of some of the discriminatory or adverse acts associated with the protected class of vaccination status, let's talk about some of the things this new law doesn't do. Again, if you read the bill or statute, you will see the law explicitly states that it does not apply to the existing vaccination requirements imposed on schools and daycares. Those requirements are not under Title 49 of the Montana Code Annotated, where you find the Montana Human Rights Act and Governmental Code of Fair Practices. And the Bureau can only enforce the Montana Human Rights Act and the Governmental Code of Fair Practices. While vaccination status discrimination may not apply to the laws requiring certain vaccination in the context of schools and daycare, individuals subject to those requirements may still request an accommodation for a sincerely held religious belief or disability. This new law also does not prohibit the recommendation of a vaccine to an employee. A person, governmental entity, or employer does not unlawfully discriminate by recommending a vaccination to an employee. Similarly, the Montana Human Rights Act does not make it against the law to ask about someone's vaccination status or even ask for proof of vaccination status. Merely inquiring about or asking for proof of vaccination status is not in and of itself illegal. However, the law also doesn't require that a person being asked their status or to show proof of vaccination respond. While it's not unlawful to ask someone whether they've had a vaccine or to provide proof, that person has no obligation to respond and cannot be treated differently based on their response or refusal to answer. Treating them differently based on what they either tell you about their vaccination status or don't tell you about their vaccination status could be discriminatory. The protected class of vaccination status also does not prohibit an employer, person, governmental entity, or public accommodation from implementing a policy that everyone wear a mask. As long as everyone is treated the same and required to wear a mask regardless of vaccination status, a universal mask policy is not against the law. However, keep in mind that if such a policy is implemented, individuals with sincerely held religious beliefs or disabilities may be entitled to an accommodation in the form of a modification to that policy. It is also permissible for an employer, person, governmental entity, or public accommodation to suggest someone wear a mask or even request a mask be worn. But once it becomes a condition of remaining employed, receiving goods or services, or being allowed to enter a business, for example, and those who are vaccinated are not required to wear a mask, then it is discriminatory. As mentioned earlier, the prohibition against vaccination and immunity passport status discrimination does not include small incentives for receiving a vaccination, so long as the incentive is not so substantial that it would be coercive. A person, governmental entity, public accommodation, or employer can offer incentives for someone to get vaccinated. If you go to the Bureau's website at montanadiscrimination.com and review the HB 702 FAQs, you will see examples of a water bottle and a gift card with a value of less than $25 not being so substantial so as to be coercive. On the other hand, the Bureau has found a case of an employer offering employees 4 hours of paid leave upon proof of vaccination to be coercive and therefore discriminatory. The new law sets out some exceptions and exemptions that relate to particularly vulnerable facilities. There may be situations where a healthcare facility can require masks or implement reasonable accommodations in order to protect those present at the facility. This provision can be found at Section 49.2.312, subsection 3b in Montana Code Annotated. Also, licensed nursing homes, long-term care facilities, and assisted living facilities are exempt from complying with the vaccination status and immunity passport statute if complying would result in a violation of regulations or guidance issued by the CDC or CMS. If you'd like more information about these exceptions and exemptions, please read the statute and check out the Human Rights Bureau FAQ section on our website at montanadiscrimination.com. To finish up this presentation, there are a couple of points you should be aware of. First, it's important to understand that anyone who feels they've been discriminated against can file a complaint with our Bureau. The Human Rights Bureau conducts intake appointments and may draft complaints for the consideration of charging parties, but it's completely up to the charging party whether they want to file a complaint. Also, even if the Bureau does not draft a complaint, a person can draft their own complaint and file it, or hire an attorney to do so. The Bureau cannot turn away complaints and is duty-bound to investigate them once filed. Second, this law providing vaccination and immunity passport status as a protected class in Montana is new, and there's been no judicial review or guidance yet. Third, information provided in this presentation contains legal information, but legal information is not the same as legal advice, which is the application of law to an individual's specific circumstances. And fourth, at the Bureau, we do our best to provide neutral information that's accurate and useful, but we always recommend you consult an attorney if you want professional assurance that our information and your interpretation of it is appropriate to your particular situation. You should now have a basic understanding of discrimination laws regarding the protected class of vaccination and immunity passport status. Additional, more in-depth trainings on topics mentioned in this training, such as harassment and retaliation, can be found in other training videos offered on the Montana Human Rights Bureau's YouTube channel. For more information about discrimination or the Bureau, please visit our website at montanadiscrimination.com or call us toll-free at 1-800-542-0807 or locally at 406-444-2884.